I write prose, literary prose, and I aspire to be a stylist. By that I mean that I make an effort to reduce down my language and ideas to their essence for the sake of precision and efficiency. For writers like me, to help get us in the mood and mindset for the rigor necessary for boiled down prose, I think it's fantastic to have one or two favorite poets that we can recur to, that we can read again and again to get a sense of that neat, sweet-sounding condensation of language, and therefore to remind us of the very demanding requirements that come with being a stylist. For me, that poet has always been a guy named Jack Gilbert. Jack Gilbert was born and bred in Pittsburgh to a working class family, but ultimately his sensibility was cultivated abroad, in Paris, in Amsterdam, in the Greek islands, in Japan, where he lived a remote and sometimes hermit-like existence dedicated to understanding himself through, let's say, material privation, but spiritual and sensual gluttony. Okay, what he called greed, fed by romantic love and passionate lovemaking. The way he used poetry, he died in 2012, reminds me of how Brad Listi, the Brad Listi who is the host and creator of the Other People podcast, the best literary podcast out there, the way he uses prose in his short and excellent memoir with fictional elements, Be Brief and Tell Them Everything, published by IG Publishing in 2022. Remember, in this phase of book rants, and who knows how long it will last, we are taking classic and consecrated writers, because videos about those types of writers get more views, and views matter to me, but we are tying the tried and true to more recently published, lesser known authors, because the current scene matters to us, and there is talent there if we know where to look for it. Okay, so in this episode, we are going to feature The Great Fires, which is my favorite Jack Gilbert collection. He only wrote 5 in 50 years of writing poetry. And Brad Listi's book of autofiction, Be Brief and Tell Them Everything. I think they both set out to do something similar. In The Great Fires, published in 1994, there are 85 poems, written between 1982 and 1992. That's not a lot of poems to write in a decade. Jack Gilbert was not a prolific poet, okay? But so much is packed into the poems in The Great Fires. I have never read such a dense and at the same time readable poetry collection. More on that later. The poems are about falling in and out of love, about committing adultery, brazenly committing it, about sex, very often extramarital sex, as a form of self-realization. Nothing casual or superficial about Jack Gilbert's sex. In that way, he reminds me a bit of James Salter in A Sport and a Pastime and Burning the Days. But the poetry collection is also about how loss and solitude are a form of self-realization for him, a way to translate himself, as he says, which I suspect means how he made himself understandable to himself, how he decoded himself. Before I say anything more about Jack Gilbert's poetry and what I think it achieved, let me recite one of them for you. A short one, okay, called Going There. A plane is coming, so I'm gonna wait till the plane leaves and then I'm gonna recite it for you, okay? We're near the Seville airport, so I'm gonna have to stop the video every once in a while for the sake of audio. Anyway, Going There by Jack Gilbert. Of course it was a disaster. That unbearable dearest secret has always been a disaster. The danger when we try to leave, going over and over afterward what we should have done instead of what we did. But for those short times we seemed to be alive. Misled, misused, lied to and cheated, certainly. But for that little while, we visited our possible life. Okay, so clearly, for Jack Gilbert, stunning visual imagery and turns of phrase are not really the point. Okay, the language really does, or really is in service of whatever idea that he's trying to explore. If sometimes the language is a bit heightened, That's because he's trying to communicate what language can't quite communicate, which is what all poetry should be, but very often isn't because of attempts at linguistic gymnastics, cleverness, showing off, okay? All that gets in the way. Sometimes lack of poetic ambition gets in the way. And I'm not talking about careerism. I mean, Jack Gilbert dropped his career to be able to write great poetry, all right? He reduced down distractions and responsibilities to have a shot at greatness. That to me is true poetic ambition. He didn't care about how many books he published or who reviewed them or what university lecture series he might be invited to participate in or what awards he might garner, okay? All he cared about was getting a handle on what he called magnitude. Magnitude of existence, of love, of loss, of place, and how that formed him and for what. You know, there are two great videos on YouTube. I'm going to put the links to them in the video description, and I'll also put them at the end of this video. I think they were sponsored by something called the Lannan Foundation. Anyway, one video is of him reading poems from the Great Fires, and in the second video, it's the interview he gave. And in the interview he gave, he said something fascinating. He said that he was very interested in thinking in poetry, but as poetry, okay? Every poem, or what the thread that holds every poem together, seems to be just beyond his grasp and therefore the reader's grasp, okay? You've got all these images and thoughts burned into his brain, and they're written down on the page, and the reason behind them is elusive, but at the same time perceptible. You know, it's the fact that he brings us close to this mystery, right? The poem's title, Going There. That's what makes Jack Gilbert's poetry indispensable to me, right? It's because of all the work that he's done, okay? That allows us to visit our possible life. And that brings us to Be Brief and Tell Them Everything by Brad Listi, also a seeker, also out to understand himself and his circumstances, in part through the relentless honing of his prose. He also took between 10 and 12 years to write his book, or to get it right. It's about Los Angeles, the town he lives in. It's about trying to understand artistic stagnancy, the suck of social media, the vocation of podcasting, which kind of piggybacks with his vocation as a writer. But it's also about falling in love, in this case with one woman, getting married, happily married, but then the two of them, their identity being formed by loss, regrets, disappointments, grief. They had multiple miscarriages, and when their second child finally was born, a son, he was born with an incurable illness, cerebral palsy. You know, because Brad Listi is a creative writer, he understands things like narrative, structure, pacing, but they're all in service of the previously mentioned things. You know, it's so hard to think in fiction without boring the reader, without making it a slog for the reader. You know, if Jack Gilbert was very interested in thinking in poetry but as poetry, then Brad Listi, it seems, is very interested in thinking in novels, but novelistically, and he's exceptional at it, okay? Many of the thoughts are so sharply composed that the sensation is like they explode in your brain and sort of drip down the sides. You know, I once heard it said that Shakespeare's best, or rather most mature poems, are his least quotable poems. And that makes sense to me, because for the lines to have their fullest impact, they need to be embedded in the context. That could very easily be applied to Be Brief and Tell Them Everything. I mean, Brad Listi in this book is a mature writer, okay? Curiosity. He's obviously got it in his podcast, okay? But he's also got it towards himself, but not in any egotistical or self-absorbed way. He wants to understand himself to be a better husband, a better father, a better writer, a better standard bearer for contemporary literature. You know, curiosity, patience, and perseverance. I'd say those are his three greatest talents. Of course, he's got all the other tools. But those three talents, man, I mean, he waited until his book was done. So few writers are capable of doing that. And it turns out to be this tremendously readable, satisfying, and profound book. You know, I want to come back to something I said before. You know, there's this misconception among certain literati, okay, that easy to read books have less to say, have less substance than, let's say, the heavy, overwrought tomes. That is untrue. Okay? The Great Fires by Jack Gilbert and Be Brief and Tell Them Everything by Brad Listi are easy but not light reading. All right? You might blow through a chapter or a poem or even the entire book, but the mystery remains. The work throbs with what the writing, no matter how crystal clear, can't quite capture. And that's what gives the work its gancho. Okay? Am I saying that Brad Listi is another Jack Gilbert? I mean, that is a tall order. Okay? Jack Gilbert is the best contemporary poet that I've ever read. Brad Listi is not the best contemporary novelist that I've ever read, but he is doing something very important, okay, and very moving.